Madam President,
The Minority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
First, Madam President, let me join all of my colleagues in wishing the Senate pro tem, the senior senator from Iowa, Senator Grassley, a speedy and quick recovery. We know he's a strong man, and we have every confidence he will beat this back, as he has beaten many other adversities back in the past. Now, it's been nearly 2 weeks since every major news network called the presidential election for Joe Biden. Preparations for the incoming Biden administration are well underway, and still, President Trump refuses to accept reality. This morning brought a fresh series of presidential delusions on Twitter. President Trump declared, sometimes in capital letters, that the election was a fraud, a joke, even unconstitutional. Imagine that, an unconstitutional election. That's because Trump's ego is such, when he doesn't win, everything is wrong, false, etc. President Trump, get out of your bubble. You lost. Joe Biden will be sworn in as the next president of the United States on January 20th. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Get out of the bubble and work on a transition. And last night, continuing President Trump's outrageous and dishonest behavior, President Trump fired our country's chief election security officer, Chris Krebs, an honorable public servant, because he confirmed that our elections were secure, reinforcing the #1 rule of working for Donald Trump: you can never tell the truth. But no matter who he fires or how many times he tweets, President Trump cannot change reality. He lost the presidential election. Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States, and it's time for President Trump to quit the nonsense, admit the truth, and move on. Any time my Republican colleagues want to tell him that would be fine by me. Now, on another matter entirely. The country is facing the worst phase of the pandemic. As the number of new infections and hospitalizations threaten once again to overwhelm the capacity of our healthcare system, we have to make sure that our nurses and doctors and all of our healthcare professionals have the PPE they need to protect themselves and their patients safely. We all remember the early days of the crisis, when healthcare professionals in some parts of the country were forced to jury-rig masks and gloves from spare clothing and bits of string. In my home state of New York, nursing homes alone were burning through 12 million pieces of PPE a week during the height of the pandemic in April. The recent surge in cases might bring us all back to or beyond the peak levels we saw earlier this year. We must do everything in our power to avoid a repeat of the widespread PPE shortages. So, I am joining Senators Murray, Peters, Baldwin, and Murphy, and we are introducing new legislation that authorizes $10 billion for the Strategic National Stockpile to purchase large quantities of PPE, including N95 respirators, gloves, gowns, face masks, face shields, and surgical masks. N95 masks don't need to be worn by every American on a daily basis, but they provide a much higher degree of protection to our healthcare professionals and frontline workers who are exposed to the virus more regularly. That's why we need the Defense Production Act and get those N95 masks in the hands of any healthcare professional who needs it. We are calling once again for the Defense Production Act, grossly underutilized by the current administration, to be invoked in order to expand industrial capacity to meet surging demand. Our bill will create a $1 billion grant program for small business to retool their facilities to assist in the production of PPE. For months, our communities have been held together by the quiet heroism of nurses, doctors, caregivers, and essential workers. We call them frontline workers because they're like our soldiers, putting their own lives at risk to protect the lives of others. And just as we would never send our troops into battle without helmets or bulletproof vests, We must never leave our frontline workers to battle diseases without the N95 masks they need, as well as other PPE, like gloves and gowns that serve as their armor. So our bill, the Protect Our Heroes Act of 2020, should be part of a bipartisan discussion on the next COVID relief bill. Our bill will allow frontline workers to get the N95 masks they need and deserve. We urge bipartisan support for this proposal. The truth is, there should be a great urgency to get something done here in Congress to defeat the virus, save American lives, and forestall even greater pain for our workers and businesses. Speaker Pelosi and I have negotiated for months in good faith with the Trump administration to find an agreement on a COVID relief bill. Democrats lowered our proposal by $1.2 trillion to move closer to our Republican counterparts. Meanwhile, Leader McConnell and Senate Republicans refused to take part in those negotiations. Instead, the Republican leader has asked the Senate to accept several inadequate partisan proposals. And in every version of the COVID relief legislation that the Republican majority has put on the floor, there have been poison pills included to ensure the bill will fail. Many members of the Republican Senate caucus want to spend no dollars, so Leader McConnell has to twist himself in pretzels to put any bill on the floor. And the only way he can get support of his caucus is to put poison pills in so he can wink at them and say, hey, this won't pass. So, Senate Republicans are seeing this pandemic as an opportunity to try and make it harder to hold corporations accountable when they put their workers at risk. I heard the Republican leader this morning give the same long, tired speech that pretends as if Democrats haven't been trying to negotiate with our colleagues, that we haven't been trying over and over again to get our Republican colleagues to talk with us. The leader's position hasn't changed over the past few months. He said it again this morning. It's the Republican proposal or nothing at all. I would remind the Republican leader the House has passed a bill the Senate has not. And the only Senate bill that the leader brings to the floor gets zero Democratic support. And yet the Republican leader's position, if you don't take my bill, get nothing, when he knows his bill can't pass. Can't pass the Senate, can't pass the House. It's a feeble position as the pandemic rages, and it just doesn't fly. We Democrats have lowered our proposal by over $1 trillion to move closer in negotiations. And what did Senate Republicans do? They didn't move in our direction, they moved further away by cutting their already inadequate proposal in half, making compromise even more difficult. So, look, we need to reset the conversation here. The country is in desperate straits, maybe more desperate than it has ever been in this crisis. The consensus view of economists and experts is that the country requires a substantial injection of aid, meaning relief to our schools, small businesses, the unemployed, state and local governments, our healthcare system, among other things. These are not frivolous. These are not someone's whim. These are the desperate needs of people crying out for help. Almost none of them covered adequately in the Republican leader's bill. This morning, New York's MTA announced a cut to subways and buses, a flashing warning sign about how desperately we need transit relief. We are going to fight hard for transit relief. None of it is in Leader McConnell's bill. The 2 vaccines in development must be produced and distributed on a massive scale, and they must reach underserved and minority communities. The House Heroes bill goes much further in getting that done than the McConnell bill. So it's time for our two parties to sit down together and hash out a compromise on a bill that meets the needs of the American people. We've been going around in circles, the Republican leader in particular, for far too long, with nothing new added to the conversation. So Speaker Pelosi and I have formally invited the Republican leader and our Senate Republican colleagues to join us in bipartisan talks. Our colleagues face a simple choice. They can put the election behind them and work across the aisle to get something done, or they can remain in their partisan corner, defending the poisonous lies of a flailing president, refusing to do the people's desperately needed business. I yield the floor.